The First World War. It brought death and destruction on a scale the world had never seen before. For years, the French Army, for instance, had fought desperately in the trenches of the Western Front, enduring endless bombardments, mud, disease, and horrific losses. By 1917, France had been bled dry. Morale was crumbling, and the men in the trenches were reaching a breaking point. All it would take was one more failed offensive, one more pointless massacre, to push them over the edge. By 1917, the war in the West had turned into a nightmare of stalemate. Both sides were locked in defensive lines stretching hundreds of kilometers, fortified with barbed wire, machine guns, and concrete bunkers. Each year, Allied commanders promised a new, decisive attack that would finally break the German lines. Each year, thousands of men went over the top, and almost none returned. The French soldiers called it la boucherie, the slaughterhouse. Still, the generals kept insisting that one more offensive would end it all. In April 1917, a new commander, General Nivelle, promised to deliver victory in just 48 hours. His plan was ambitious: a massive artillery bombardment followed by a rapid infantry advance between the towns of Arras and the Chemin Ridge. Nivelle claimed his strategy would crush German resistance and bring the war to a swift end. He even promised that if the plan failed, he'd call it off immediately. But not everyone believed him. Many of his officers warned that the plan was reckless. Yet, desperate for victory, France's political and military leaders approved it anyway. The Germans, however, already knew what was coming. Their intelligence had intercepted French communications, and they reinforced their defenses. When the attack began on April 16, 1917, 850,000 French soldiers went forward against 35 well-prepared German divisions behind the powerful Hindenburg Line. The results were catastrophic. French troops charged through rain and mud into machine gun fire. In some units, men fell faster than they could advance. By the end of the first day, around 40,000 French soldiers were dead or wounded. Nivelle didn't stop the offensive after 48 hours as promised. He kept it going for 18 days. Every day, another 10,000 men were lost. When it was finally called off, the French had gained only a few kilometers of ground. The offensive was a total failure. Morale collapsed. Soldiers cursed Nivelle as a murderer. He was soon removed from command, but the damage was already done. Moments like these are difficult to capture. The chaos, the emotion, the scale of history unfolding. When we bring stories like this to life here at Simple History, we rely on visuals and sounds to make you feel those moments. And that's where Storyblocks, the sponsor of today's video, comes in. We use Storyblocks to find the perfect sound effects and music that bring history to life, and you can too. Whether you're making videos, learning to edit, or just experimenting with storytelling, Storyblocks gives you access to unlimited downloads of high-quality stock video, music, and sound effects, all for one simple subscription. Without Storyblocks, this video you're watching right now would feel flat and quiet. But with their library of sound effects and music, we can bring history back to life and pull you right into the world we're exploring. If you make videos or just want to experiment with storytelling, go to storyblocks.com/simplehistory or click the link in the description below to get started with unlimited stock media downloads at one set price. The French army had suffered almost 4 million casualties since 1914. Soldiers were physically and mentally exhausted. Leave had been delayed for months at a time. Food was poor. The trenches were infested with rats, and many men had lost all faith in their commanders. When word spread that Nivelle's offensive had achieved nothing, the frustration boiled over. At first, individual groups of soldiers simply refused to move up to the front lines when ordered. Then, entire units began to disobey orders. They shouted slogans like, "Down with the war," and "We've had enough." Some troops refused to return from rest areas. Others boarded trains and tried to head for Paris, only to be stopped by the military police. In a few cases, drunken brawls and vandalism broke out, but most acts of defiance were peaceful. The soldiers weren't looting or rioting. They were just refusing to fight. Word spread quickly through the army. Within weeks, the unrest had spread across dozens of units. Between 30 to 40,000 French soldiers, across up to 16 army corps, were refusing to go back into the trenches. The French High Command suddenly faced a terrifying prospect: an army on the verge of collapse. If the Germans had known how deep this crisis ran, they might have launched their own offensive and broken through the French lines entirely. Many officers feared that France was about to experience its own version of the Russian Revolution, which had just taken place a few months earlier. In Russia, soldiers and workers had risen up, toppled the Tsar, and plunged the empire into civil war. But in France, this wasn't a revolution. The mutineers weren't trying to overthrow their government or surrender to Germany. They still wanted to defend their country. They just refused to die in futile offensives. A socialist soldier named Louis Barthas recalled how some of his comrades wanted to set up a Soviet or Soldiers' Council, like in Russia, but Barthas refused. He later wrote, "I had no desire to shake hands with a firing squad just to pretend we were Russians." Instead, he and many others urged peaceful protest to demand change. The mutineers' demands were surprisingly reasonable. They wanted an end to the senseless attacks, better food and living conditions, a fair system for leave. Soldiers were willing to keep defending France, but refused to take part in offensives that seemed to waste lives for no purpose. This made the 1917 French mutinies unique in military history, a rebellion driven not by politics, but by sheer human exhaustion. After Nivelle was dismissed, General Pétain was appointed to restore order. Pétain was respected by his men. He understood the toll the war had taken and promised to listen. He took a two-pronged approach, both the carrot and the stick. First, Pétain cracked down on the most serious offenders. Thousands of soldiers were arrested and court-martialed. Around 22,000 were found guilty of mutiny or desertion. Between 200 to 500 were sentenced to death, but only 26 to 55 were actually executed. The rest were sent to prison or had their sentences suspended on the condition they returned to duty. The message was clear: defiance would not be tolerated. But punishment alone wouldn't fix the deeper problem. Pétain then addressed the soldiers' grievances. He toured the front personally, speaking with units and assuring them that their lives would not be wasted. He improved food supplies, increased rest periods, and reformed the leave system so that every soldier got regular time away from the trenches. Most importantly, he halted any large-scale offensives until the French army could recover. His approach worked. By the summer of 1917, discipline was restored. The soldiers returned to their posts, still weary, still angry, but willing to defend their homeland once again. The French Army's mutinies were one of the largest acts of military disobedience in modern history, yet they were also remarkably restrained. Unlike the Russian army, the French army didn't collapse, the government didn't fall, the front didn't disintegrate. The mutineers' message was simple: we will defend France, but we will not die needlessly. Thanks to Petain's reforms, the army regained enough strength to hold the line through 1917 and into 1918, when American troops began arriving to bolster the Allied forces. By the time the war ended, France had lost over 1 million men, and millions more were wounded or missing. A generation had been scarred forever. After the war, the French government downplayed the mutinies, fearing they would be seen as shameful or disloyal. Records were censored, and the topic was rarely discussed publicly for decades. But historians now view them differently. The mutinies were not a betrayal, they were a cry for survival. The soldiers had endured years of slaughter and finally drew a line between sacrifice and suicide. Their actions forced the French leaders to confront the brutal realities of industrial warfare and the limits of human endurance. The events of 1917 revealed something powerful about the human spirit. Even in a war of unimaginable suffering, the French soldiers did not revolt out of cowardice or defeatism. They revolted because they still valued life, their own and that of their comrades. Their courage wasn't just on the battlefield, but in standing up to impossible demands. In the end, their protest helped save what was left of the French army, and when the time came in 1918, they stood firm during Germany's final offensives and helped achieve victory. Thanks again to Storyblocks for supporting Simple History. Check them out today at storyblocks.com/simplehistory.